saw most of you recently, well, within the month, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'll be going back to that area in 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks from yesterday to New Jersey. And this is a really a common topic that I'm approached very often, for which I'm approached very often. And it's just no wonder. We live in a different world than our grandparents and great-grandparents. The environment is different. And most of these diseases, which we're talking about, things like IBS, IBD, Crohn's, colitis, a family of disorders, they didn't used to be as prevalent as they are now. However, they're on the topic, it's a topic on everybody's mind because they're so closely related to what's going on in our modern lives. And so why don't we start by reviewing this family of disorders. And I know I understand the terms fairly good, but some people may not. So if you heard some of these things, just bear with me so we make sure we're all on the same page. It's also very interesting that this set of diseases is really differentiated only by words. We still don't know if they're all related or not. Some we have real specific concept, like celiac disease. We know what's going on there. But the others, it's just determined by symptom, and the cause may or may not be the same. We don't know. So what are these diseases? Well, we can start out by saying colitis itself is just inflammation of the colon. And then ulcerative colitis is inflammation of the colon plus ulcers. Okay, that's the only difference in those two. Let's move on. Irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease. What's the difference between these? Well, they're all inflammation, and one might be just the shallow lining of the intestine, and the other ones makes deep ulcers. And so you go to your doctor and say, "Wow, I don't feel very good," and then he looks, might do a colonoscopy, and say, "Oh, you've got ulcerative colitis. You don't have Crohn's disease." Great. Okay, now you know what it is. What's the treatment? So, well, I actually don't know the treatment. The treatment is the same for both of them, but I know one has ulcers and one doesn't. So that's why you have this disease or the other. You know what? The patient doesn't care. I mean, they just want to get fixed. And if the treatment is the same for all of them, let's get on to the treatment here. Let's look at irritable bowel syndrome. It's called a syndrome because it's a group of symptoms. And that's it. That's the only thing we know. It's a group of symptoms. Do you have bloating? Do you have diarrhea? Do you have any bleeding out of the rectum? Do you have cramps? Do you have diarrhea or constipation? And you may say yes or no to any of those, and it won't stop you from being diagnosed with the disease, because there is a irritable bowel syndrome that is with constipation. There's one without constipation. The third category is when you have constipation and diarrhea alternatively, and then there's a fourth one where you don't have any of those. I've always kind of found this frustrating and amusing at the same time because there's so much thought and energy going into classifying the diseases rather than there is to treat it. The symptoms for all of these diseases, whether it's Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or irritable bowel syndrome or celiac, are all the same. So I can't help you there. But what they all have in common, absolutely, without a doubt, is inflammation. They are all inflammatory diseases. So that's actually good news. I think the difference between one or the other of these diseases is probably just genetics. You have an insult coming from the environment, and how you respond to that is your genetic makeup. But the response is the same. That is inflammation, long-term chronic inflammation. And then the inflammation gets out of control. And then your own cells start attacking the lining of your intestines. That's really it. So we can control inflammation. We can control these diseases. And that's actually what I did. I didn't know I had Crohn's. I just know that I was, about 10 years ago, I was in a lot of stress. I was forming this company, and I was chasing a dollar. We have to get funding. We've got the research is going to cost a couple of $1 million. And I was under a lot of stress, and I started getting cramps and a little bleeding, and I drove down to West Palm Beach to this famous gastrointestinal guy, and he said, "Oh, you've got Crohn's disease." Okay, how do we fix it? What's causing Crohn's disease? He said, "Well, you know, your intestines are inflamed. The inflammation and the injury is deep. It's not just on the surface. And there are no ulcers, so I know it's Crohn's disease. And I also know because of that, you need to have surgery because your guts are dissolving in certain patches." Oh, that sounds great. So what did that cause me to do? I mean, one of the problems with Crohn's is stress.
Right.
You tell me I'm going to have to cut my guts out. I mean, that doesn't sound real well, but it's basically an excision. And the reason is not a cure, because it's just want to keep your guts from leaking all over the place. And so we'll excise this piece and that piece, stitch you back together, and then you'll function for a while. And then you might need surgery again. Now, ulcerative colitis, it is a little different. So that's why we know they are two diseases, even though the symptoms are the same as far as diarrhea or not, and cramping, etc. But if you cut out part of the intestine for ulcerative colitis, it usually won't return. So that shows you that it's not just moving around like in Crohn's. It's patchy. The inflammation is patchy. It runs deep into the lining, whereas ulcerative colitis is usually shallow, except for where the ulcers are. And it's continuous on a patch or stretch of the intestines. Also, is very interesting is that for Crohn's, and I think if I can recall here, Crohn's involves just the anus. Ulcerative colitis involves the rectum. Just to really, we can't do anything about that, and it really doesn't help us, except that that lets us know they are two diseases, different diseases, but the treatment and the other symptoms are the same. So what did I do? I went back to my office and worried some more and said, you know, doctor, heal yourself. We've all heard that.
Right.
I dug into what was going on with Emulin, and we were starting to notice all these anti-inflammatory effects. I did a lot of my own research as far as background literature, and said, well, here's the concept with Crohn's. You have to be genetically predisposed, of course. That's like any disease. It's something to do with diet. You need to have a healthy diet. And it's stress triggers it. So you have to have those three combinations. You have to have a stress, you have to have something wrong with your diet, and you have to be genetically predisposed. I know everyone here is interested in diet, and I wasn't going to try to determine or exactly what was wrong with me. I just went on a super healthy diet. I don't know how healthy it really was because I probably ended up having a lack of certain nutrients, but I mean, I cut out everything. I cut out milk products. I cut out wheat, gluten. I cut out all grains entirely. And I didn't try to substitute back in oats or anything. I just said, I'm not taking any chances. I got my diet under control. I stopped eating excessive fats. That's where I probably did myself a disservice because some of the oils needed where I didn't have my diet. Nevertheless, what happened, how does that diet affect? It's not the things in the food particularly that are tearing you up. It's because you're managing your microflora.
Right.
In your body. All recognize that. You're really being a herdsman, a cattleman, or whatever. You're running a farm inside you. I hope everybody here understands that. Most of these diseases, I'll say all of these diseases, are really something to do with the biome, microflora. Now, this may or may not sound a little unusual to you, but the microflora in the gut, along with that nervous system that surrounds the large and small intestine, together are an organ. And I mean, you can look that up and find out yourself, but it's thought to be almost a hormone producing organ, because that's actually what happens. Those bacteria produce hormones that our body reacts to. And so, and it's a completely separate system. You can actually cut that nervous system, separate it from the brain by cutting the vagus nerve, and it still functions by itself. So it's not particularly picking up receptors and transmitting neurotransmitters to the brain, and then the brain through the pituitary gland and adrenal cortex, then feeding back hormones. No, they make hormones themselves. They make steroids. It also processes steroids. These bacteria get rid of drugs and toxins, and they're constantly, there's this flow back and forth of signals, chemical signals. And you can mess that system up by eating improperly, not giving them what they want. It's really not giving you what you want. It's giving your biome what they want. And when there's a balance there, there's the right environment. There's that word balance again. The environment, meaning the food, and the organisms, they work in harmony to produce a set of chemicals that are beneficial to your body and regulate your body. They actually are part of the fight or flight syndrome. You can dump acid into your stomach, increased acid. So why would, if you got under stress and you're in a fight or flight, or you're sick somehow, why does your body dump acid into your stomach? That for so long, it didn't make any sense to me. And I'm not the one that figured this out, but that acid changes the biome really quick, in minutes. And that biome start producing hormones that then have an effect on our respiration and heart rate. Along with chemicals from the adrenal cortex, it's not just the brain, hypothalamus, pituitary, etc. No, it's this is another organ, another endocrine organ that causes us to produce these hormones. So stress changes your environment and changes the pH, and then it changes the biome, and then they in turn change chemical signals, and that's really fine for, a day or so if you're responding to some environmental issue. But long term, this is deadly, because a key ingredient to that system is beneficial inflammation. And we don't want that inflammation to hang around forever. So That's why stress is a factor. It changes the environment, which causes a chemical reaction. It's not so much, I'll call nervous energy during stress. Yes, that can happen, but we have thought for so long that, oh, you're under stress, your nerves are starting to fire because, you know, what, should I get out of here? Should I run? Is the house burning down? It's actually more chemical than electrical.
Right.
It's through these changes in the actual environment, and then the bacteria start pumping out chemicals that some are good, some are bad, some are very good in the short term, horrible in the long term. Inflammation, all the problems we constantly talk about. So I couldn't get my stress under control. You can't say, oh, how many times have people said, well, don't worry about that? I mean, what? I do that? Don't worry. Okay, now I'm worried about worrying. I do that. I've got an exam in the morning. You're not going to help anything by worrying. You're just going to lose sleep. Okay, I'm not going to worry. Click. All right, I'm not worried. Forget that. My stress continued to go up to the roof. However, by doing my computer did. Can you still see me?
Yep. Because
my computer just lost its screen. Okay, hold on. I got to go back. How about this? Hey, there. I don't know why it went blank. So by going on this super critical diet, removing everything I could possibly think of, I actually was able to force my biome to get more in balance. And then once I took that stress off, then, you know, it was just all tied together. So then I actually became less stressful. And even though I had stress, it became less stressful because the chemical modulators there, I had those under control. And then I went back to the doctor and he said, well, you may not need surgery. Then I got less stressed. And now I don't have any issues because I changed that diet and I increased my level of Emulin because I knew it was anti-inflammatory, and it took me about a year, but I got out of it. I have no issues whatsoever. But now I am very careful that I'm taking care of my little farm that lives inside of me. And I understand what's going on with people. And I've slowly been able to introduce things back into my diet. Look, guys, I even cut out every spice. Even though we know that there's plenty of spices that are very good for you, I said, I'm not taking any risk. I eliminated Tabasco. I mean, that's how bad it was, guys. I didn't put Tabasco in my diet. But I slowly did introduce, once I get everything balanced again, then I could slowly introduce it. And that's what I tell you, need to tell everybody that. Okay, let's get you on a healthy diet, a really bland, if you will, but, you know, cut out all the grains, cut out all the wheat, because these are possible. I don't care if we know you're sensitive to wheat or not. Let's not take a chance. Cut that out. Cut out most legumes, because they have a lot of off-gassing, which again, the farm living in you, that's where gas comes from. You know, I have found out that a lot of people think that they eat stuff and then their own digestive juices dissolve the beans or whatever, and they cause gas to come out somehow. No, it's not. It's methane and carbon dioxide being produced by the bacteria. You know, you're really making beer or wine inside your gut. Mm-hmm. That's where the flatulence comes, and the cramps and the pains. It's from that gut. So you eat a good diet to make them healthy, not you. And then you'll be healthy after that. So just get rid of all of those possible contenders that irritate people. And you'll wipe out, I think you'll wipe out 60 or 70% of it. Then make sure they have anti-inflammation things in their diets. And now, for sure, we have to have enough bulk. We have to have enough fiber in our body for everything to work. And take Emulin. Now, this is a really good case where Emulin is more indicated than the original sources, such as the berries. because there's things in berries that will promote problems in your gut. You know, they cause diarrhea.
Right.
And, you know, biology is just so fascinating every time you turn around. Why do berries cause diarrhea? Because that's the whole concept of for instance, a bird eats a berry, the berry causes diarrhea, and the bird poops out everything, including the seeds, and it splatters down on the ground, and it's got fertilizer and a seed.
Mm-hmm.
They make you have diarrhea on purpose. So this is a case where we don't want to give people any berries at this stage, but we can give Emulin, which will not cause the diarrhea part because it's pure flavonoids, and flavonoids themselves cause no distress whatsoever. In fact, they promote a healthy gut lining. These myristotin, quercetin, chlorogenic acid, and gallic acid all promote a healthy gut lining. They also lower some of the organisms that are in this biome. For instance, if you've got a sheep farm and the wolves are coming on in, this is a way to get rid of the wolves. So we know that Emulin does reduce some of the bad bacteria because they don't like what Emulin does to their digestive systems. That's just really fortunate. You know, we didn't invent that, but it just so happens that Emulin is good for the good bacteria and it's bad for the bad bacteria because these bacteria digest things a little different, using more or less of the tricarboxylic acid cycle, the Krebs cycle, or not. Some of them are anaerobic, some of them are not. They all have a little bit of digestion different issues, and so Emulin will promote the good ones and it demotes the bad ones. So I got rid of Crohn's, and that's exactly how you do it. Great. You got to get your diet under control. Eliminate, I mean, we don't want to spend time on the list of 100 things that are good and 100 things that are bad. You can easily find that in the literature, even on the internet. I've looked at them and they're fairly accurate. Most of those lists, even though they list them there for the wrong reason, sometimes they're pretty accurate. What is good for your gut, your biome, or not. And there's also very good lists on pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. So you build a diet. Doctor-patient relationship, trust is important. You know, you can just be straight up, say, look, we do not understand the exact underlying causes of all these diseases. We know they are different diseases, but what we do know is how to control them. We can do that. We have a very good chance of getting this under control. All right, boom, immediately stress will drop in those patients. Right. And that's your job. You know, I feel that's really what I do. I don't know hardly anything. But what I do is I convince people I know things, and then therefore they trust me. Right. And they have less stress in their life. And I give people confidence. Say, okay, we can lick this thing. There's no guarantees. Don't ever say, oh, we're going to do. No, look, there's a strong probability that the prognosis is very good. And so this is what we're going to try, and you'll see that stuff go away. So that's for Crohn's. It's the same for ulcerative colitis. Remember, the only difference in those is that we don't understand the cause exactly. They are not autoimmune diseases, by the way. They are immune involved diseases, which causes inflammation, but your body doesn't particularly send out antibodies that particularly attack your own cells. But it does send out chemicals that and family of white blood cells that end up attacking yourself. So it's like you get attacked regardless. But one of them is like on purpose and the other one's not on purpose. The result is still inflammation. Let's tackle that inflammation. So ulcerative colitis is identical. You can know that surgery will probably cure ulcerative colitis. It's very rarely does it come back after you've cut out a piece of intestine. Who wants to do that? Let's get rid of the inflammation first, and that's an absolute last end of the planet. Exactly. Indication is surgery. So I think there's a lot of people here that can agree with this. So, you know, up until I'll just call them alternative healthcare practices came online and accepted, it was terrible. You said, okay, it used to be surgery. Let's cut something out. And then drugs were invented. Okay, drugs and then surgery. And then anytime someone says, wait, can we maybe do some changes in diet or counsel the person for stress, or, you know, if we could identify what's going on in their life, maybe some manipulation and aromatherapy. No, they said we were idiots, and, you know, there were court cases, and finally, until just a couple of decades ago, the court said, hey, you guys are basically a gang. You know, you're corrupted gang here. You've got to allow these other alternative practices. And in my position, I think this should be the main. These medicine and surgery should be the alternative therapies.
Right.
I'm telling you, that's the truth. I come from a family of chiropractors, and and you know, I got introduced to chiropractic when I was a little kid. I don't know why, they just grabbed me out of the playing field, and I'd go in my uncle, and he would just, you know, I didn't know what was going on, but I'm glad that happened. So I didn't have to get away from the medical and drug profession. I came from that area into accepting drugs and surgery when they are needed.
Right.
So let's put the shoe on the other foot, people. There's a place for that stuff. And I thank God for some of the things like penicillin and stuff that we developed. And I'm a little less thankful for the steroids and things like that. But okay, I'm going to take all. You guys know how much I like to talk about this area. I'm sorry I'm rambling.
That's good.
But okay, we got those two, I hope, taken care of. And when you ask the questions later on, they'll all be the same. So I'll just go to the other two descriptions. Celiac disease is a nice one because we do know what's wrong with that. Exactly understand that it's exposure to wheat. And so if you eliminate wheat in the diet, the gluten, it's gluten. The reason gluten is so difficult in our modern diet is it's fantastic. I mean, it is a drug in itself. It's what gives bread its texture. And we all describe that bread, oh, it's got this texture, that texture. And whenever you have alternative recipes to get away from wheat or gluten-less bread, wheat, the texture is terrible. And so people don't like it, and they sneak back in and get a sandwich with bread anyhow. I get it. And it also, that sensation is very similar to what we've been talking about, sugar and heroin. It lights up the pleasure centers of our brain. So here's a physical stimulus that lights up that pleasure center. Now, the aroma of bread also lights up that pleasure center. You know, look, our body's just trying to get us to eat. They're saying, hey, eat this. It's good. And for the most part, our bodies do a pretty good job. It's amazing how good it does when it says, you know, why does something stink and you want to stay away from it? You know, do you smell manure? Does somebody poop in their pants around here? What's horrible about it? Let's get out of here. Well, you know what? That is guiding humans away from getting E. coli inside them. And E. coli is good for you if it stays in your intestines. That's how we know that there's some kind of feces in the environment, is you test for E. coli. So it's good when it stays inside you, and when it gets out into other parts of your body, that is really horrible diseases. And so whether it's from chickens or snails or cows or humans, that's a big source of food contamination. And our bodies know to stay away from feces not because it knows there's E. coli in there, but it knows, hey, that aroma can kill you. Get away. And like other things, the smell of some fruits, you know, you just, oh my goodness, I want to eat that pineapple. It's excellent for you. So for the most part, it does good. But when we got to gluten, that's a little, our body didn't get it quite right. And so gluten in some individuals, they are it's a food allergy. But in this case, there are proteins in the wheat. The gluten is a protein, and those proteins signal the immune system to come and get me. And our immune system sends out all the first line warriors, and they just start trying to, something's around here, let's get rid of it, and it just starts eating those people alive. Now, most people don't have that issue. And I say most people, let me restate that. Probably all of us have this issue. It's just that we don't know it, and it's very low grade. But others of us are super sensitive to the proteins. They were born with the immune system ready to go to war whenever gluten shows up. Gluten itself doesn't do anything. It just is the target. Proteins in that complex are target for the person's immune system, and they just shoot out there and tear everything up. Then we have inflammation, and then we have breakdown of tissues in the lining of the intestine. But you can eliminate wheat, and most of the time, 90% of the time, people will recover from that. So that's how you determine that. You eliminate wheat and they get better. Okay, they had celiac. But the symptoms were still the same. It's cramps, bloating, could be bleeding out of the rectum. And in that case, get rid of that protein. There's no surgery or anything. That would be ridiculous. So, and then we've got the last one in this family is the IBS, not to be confused with IBD. So it's irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, as opposed to inflammatory bowel disease. So let's review the inflammatory bowel disease is Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. They're just two of them. There's a couple more in there, but they're so rare that they still are treated by the same way. And then in the IBS, the irritable bowel syndrome, well, first of all, we call it a syndrome because it's a group of symptoms. So whenever you see syndrome, like metabolic syndrome, it doesn't mean just one thing. It just means there's a group of symptoms that could or could not be caused by the same thing. Or it could be 4 or 5 different things caused it, but the symptoms are the same. So it's a syndrome. It's not a disease. A disease is when you can identify specifically a disorder. Here it's just 4 symptoms. They happen to be the same as all the other things we've talked about. Cramps, pain, bloody bowels, blood in the stool, and but with IBS, there is no underlying problem. There's no destruction. It's just inflammation. So the tissue's not falling apart. There's no identifiable ulcers. There's like there are with these other diseases. So we do have no underlying destruction. We just have the symptoms. But man, it's terrible for the people that have it. They still have these other symptoms, you know, they still have the inflammation. So I do the same thing that people that ask me, I treat it like Crohn's because you're going to have success. I tell them to get their biome under control, get the farm under control, have a good diet, have a good pasture, and I give them Emulin. I'm always going to talk about Emulin before I talk about any synthetic anti-inflammatory but I give them Emulin. The most recent person that I did this for was my own mother-in-law. She'd had this thing for her whole life. She had just always had diarrhea or constipation, bloating and pain in the stomach, and every now and then a little blood in the stool. And she'd had that for her whole life. And she was one of those ladies that just kept quiet. You all know this type. Oh, I'm not going to complain. Don't worry.
Right.
I'm going to take care of my family. And she'd been having this, I mean, you think about that. She'd been bleeding out of her rectum for 40 years. And she just, somehow it got mentioned one day, and I said, I could fix that. And so I just gave her Emulin, told her, hey, you need to stay away from this and that. And that was a little difficult because she was from the South. And so she's eating nothing but hot sauce and pinto beans and Phaseolus vulgaris, green beans. All the things are the first thing I would pull off of her list. And so she really did not want to do that. But I did get her under control, and she was fine. But as she got older, she actually passed away 1.5 years ago. A good life, though. But as she got older, she started eating those beans again. And she says, well, you know, I don't know if I'm going to heaven or hell, but I'm going to go there with a good tasting diet. So, you know, heck, what the heck, you know? But for that 10-year period when I found out about it, I just got rid of those insults, the foods that were causing a lot of the issues. But she didn't have, she had a colonoscopy, there's nothing showed up like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. So it was just, and if you don't know what you're looking for, you can't even see inflammation. I mean, you think about it, it's got to be pretty big if you can start seeing intense red lining of the intestine and swelling. I mean, how do you detect the swelling on an intestinal wall? Because it's flexible. If it swells, it usually goes out, doesn't collapse. It expands. And so, but you know, if you did some chemical markers, look for tumor necrosis factor alpha or some of the cytokines in the blood, then you know that you have inflammation. And so those are actually rare blood tests. People never look for inflammatory markers. You know, it's rare. So, because doctors don't understand, all doctors, all healthcare professionals, not you guys, you better get it by now, but most, 90%, they do not understand that there is a such thing as chronic long-term inflammation that's just under the surface that is causing a lot of these issues. They don't get it. They think, oh, inflammation's good. We can't. And I said, well, we need to control inflammation. The first thing they say is, well, you're going to suppress the immune system because inflammation is the first line of defense. We have inflammation, and then we have the antibodies come out. Well, in the middle is the white blood cells. Inflammation, white blood cells, antibodies. If any of those get out of whack, we got trouble. I said, well, we're not trying to cut off inflammation. Again, it's the beauty of Emulin. Because, you know, the body itself has a brake, B-R-A-K-E, a brake on the inflammatory response. So let's talk to a simple one, not chemical, let's talk physical. You got a wound somewhere on your body, and the chemicals, when you're cut, and actually when it's a chemical invasion or bacteria invasion or a physical trauma, the cells, when they burst, the membranes burst, they released a signal that are not normally in the bloodstream. They're kept in vacuoles in all cells. They burst, those chemicals release. Those chemicals cause tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF, tumor necrosis factor, to be manufactured. And then the tumor necrosis factor alpha causes all these cytokines to be released. And which ones are released are the ones, it depends on your genetic makeup. And then all that inflammation stays localized because you have those chemicals from the wound, from the insult, in the area of insult. And all this is supposed to take place right there. and then it goes away in 72 hours. Well, when that happens, your body produces another type of cytokine that is like a guard, and it's watching. And if tumor necrosis factor gets too much, it shuts down TNF. And so the inflammation never gets run away. Well, this is what we've been talking about, runaway inflammation. Something's wrong, and your body continues to produce tumor necrosis factor alpha. The break that your body wasn't paying attention. You know, you sleep at the wheel. I'm just using metaphors here. And the tumor necrosis factor alpha just keeps going and going. And then that makes more of these isoleucines, these cytokines. And it's just a cycle. You got to shut something down. They're just running around in circles. And it's getting bigger. And then it spreads to the rest of the body because it's now no longer has anything to do with the local cells there at the injury making the signals. That tumor necrosis factor alpha is out there, and it just goes all over the body. We've got a beautiful system that spreads stuff throughout our body. And if it continues long enough, it gets downstream in the blood, and now tumor necrosis factor alpha is not just at the wound, it's also in your brain, and it's in your throat, and it's in your fingernails, and what does it do? It causes inflammation in all these areas. So we got to stop that, and that's what we're talking about. And Emulin appears to be just like that break. You know, this is all in retrospect. When I first made Emulin with my partner, we thought we were doing something with insulin. We emulated insulin. It looked on the surface like, hey, we're doing a lot. We're processing sugar. We must be just like insulin. Let's call it Emulin. And now, what I know today, I would have call it something with inflammation. I can't, but it'd be hard to call it emulate cyclohexachloroquine. I think that's the name of it. So how can you call it that? But I would have actually said, no, what we're doing here is regulating, not getting rid of, regulating the immune system. And it doesn't matter if it is an autoimmune, where your body is making these antibodies specifically that destroy your cells, or if it's just making other cells and antibodies that just end up destroying your cells. See, what difference does that make? It's still, your body's under attack, you're in an inflammation cycle, and it's just going to go on and on. And then in some cases, even if you remove the insult and you get the wound healed, you still got all this tumor necrosis factor all over your body, and it's just causing inflammation everywhere. Let's just get rid of that. Let's damp it down, get it back under control. Let's reset the trap. So that's really what I've got to say about these digestive disorders. They come from, they're caused from different things. One of them is autoimmune. One of them is like Crohn's is not autoimmune. It's an immune problem, but it's not autoimmune. Some of them, they all have to do with your genetics. They all have to do with your diet. And it's not because, like in the case of celiac disease, where you actually are allergic to wheat. It's not like that in all the rest of them. You're not allergic, but however, your diet is causing a change in the biome, which then causes chemicals to be released, which are just similar to celiac disease. So that still doesn't matter. Let's control the diet. Let us add Emulin. Let us talk about exercise. Why? Well, exercise reduces stress hormones. Exercise reduces tumor necrosis factor alpha. That's not exactly known how that works. However, the stress is there to get you going. And it might be that once you get going, you're through a biofeedback, you're telling your body you can turn off that stress factor. It might be as simple as that, that there's a feedback loop. Okay, I'm producing so much byproducts of exercise. well, I don't know if it's an elevated CO2 in the blood or if there's actually a feedback chemical that says, okay, we are running, we have run away. So now you can turn the stress off. That could be something as simple as that. So now you exercise. You certainly know that exercise also to improve several other things, oxygenated blood, for instance, and types of health issues. I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm a physiologist, so I'm always looking for the chemical pathway. And, but I think it might be a stress feedback system. So we remove, so exercise, it'll make you healthy. You'll end up being less stressful. Then you'll end up having less change in the biome. And then on top of that, we make sure that we've got that COP in there that watches the inflammation, but says, okay, that's enough. Calm down. Go back to your desk. Don't come out until I call you again. And then we can have very good health.
So Dr. Joe, you mentioned that as the TNF rises and spreads throughout the body, can we call that fibromyalgia, that inflammatory pain throughout the body?
Yeah, it's a component. Yes, yeah. It is absolutely. Now, tumor necrosis factor alpha has a really weird name because it sounds great, doesn't it? It was first discovered in cancerous tumors. And there was this factor. We now know what it is, but there was something, so they call it a factor.
Right.
And there were tumors, and necrosis means, of course, to die. And so necrotic tissue. So there was something coming out when they noticed in these cancers, and they said, I don't know what it is. Let's just call it tumor dead thing, tumor necrosis factor, something that kills tumors. It's great. Let's isolate this and we can just kill tumors. It seemed great, but now we find out there's tumor necrosis alpha and beta and all these others, and they're part of the inflammatory response. Mm-hmm. So that's where, but we still call it TNF. Right. And so that misleads people when they start reading. And I encourage laypersons to read, but boy, they read some of these things. Oh, you have an excess tumor necrosis factor in your brain, or oh, you've got brain cancer. No. TNF sits right at the top of the inflammatory response cascade, and it's an efficient system. And when you need something to take care of, that thing turns on, and then it, in turn, causes all the other cytokines. And I use the word cytokine and isoleucine the same because that's what they are. And they cause the good, but if out of control, they'll cause individual diseases. Very little difference between Parkinson's and Huntington's, as an example, but except for which cytokines were stimulated by tumor necrosis factor alpha. And all of our bodies have a fingerprint of which cytokines are released from tumor necrosis factor alpha. So, and they're really hard to detect. So there's no way you can take a blood sample and then say, oh, you're going to have a predisposition to Parkinson's. So yes, this is really tumor. You see, it's wide. It's all over the body. It's not just one little area. It was because TNF is just all over there, and you're going to get, the main symptom is this pain everywhere, and your body's just trying to deal with tumor necrosis factor alpha, and you eliminate. Now there are synthetic molecules that will push down tumor necrosis factor alpha, but that's the last resort. Let's use the one that our bodies were made to work with to begin with, and get the inflammation under control. So it doesn't mean that if you control inflammation, you're going to cure all these diseases. There still is the underlying problem, and so that's why, okay, hey, get your diet. That was an underlying problem, but right. There are underlying problems. It's not just diet. It's that there's a lot of different insults that could happen that cause these changes. Look at the diet, for instance. It's not just that you're eating the wrong things. You could have had a series of drugs that knocked out your bioflora. You know, these drugs are not specific. They don't knock out just one thing like penicillin. It doesn't just take out the bad boys. It takes out all of them. So you've really got to watch that. So you can get these diseases, certainly IBS, but also the inflammatory diseases and Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, because you were on a series of drugs, bacteriostats or bactericides, either one. You know, there was a case, a strange case, of a guy that I came across back when I was more directly in agriculture. It was farm workers, and they all had IBS. And I wasn't involved directly. I was actually running the company, but our local clinician said, "You got 10 guys here, they all have IBS." So wow, that's, and they were being exposed to a fungicide in operation, and they had killed all the biome inside them. And how do you find out? So going over the diet, what's going on, and we thought we had, you know, good management practices, good farming practices, and everybody had gloves and stuff, but you know, people take shortcuts, and that we found out there was some shortcuts, and they had just knocked out the whole biome. So you can't just, okay, we changed their diet, wasn't working at all. So still there was some insult somewhere. In this case, it was, thankfully, it was identified and everything got better. And we did have to, you know, I didn't do it at that time, but our doctor, company doctor, actually recharged them with some probiotics and got them back on track.
You know, you mentioned that auto brewery condition brought about by carbs and sugars, which then can affect the liver. And there was a comment that came on my email question about cirrhosis of the liver and the eating of the liver itself. And the liver is breaking down because of this alcohol formation, be it drinking alcohol or forming it in our gut.
Yes, that's right. So I've just recently been involved in some cases like this, that where an individual who drank probably too much, but had no symptoms of having any problem, and that you would normally associate with the issues of too much alcohol intake, and they were heavy enough per male to be able to process alcohol. So that's about one so-called drink an hour. So we talk about how many drinks can you have a day. Well, if you're heavy enough, you can metabolize alcohol and get rid of it and never be inebriated by, or even hardly alcohol show up in your blood. If you are big enough and robust enough, you could drink all 24 hours a day and never have any issues. But what was going on is what you said. Still, the alcohol gets in your tissues and it poisons your body. And it's something that I'd actually overlooked about what was going on here. And that poisoning was causing, what do you think? Inflammation.
Yeah. That
ended up dissolving the liver, and in certain cases, this is actually the bile duct itself dissolves, and then the gallbladder dissolves, and then the bile soaks into the surrounding liver tissue, and that stuff is not meant to be there. Just like if you took hydrochloric acid, the acids in your stomach, and put it in your eye,
right?
It would kill your eye. In fact, it kills its own stomach. The only reason we can stand it is because we're constantly making a new lining. And so the bile was eating this guy's liver up. So in this case, the inflammation was destroying the bile gland itself and the bile duct, and then it was the bile that was dissolving in the liver. There's other cases where it's just the inflammation itself. the inflammation itself in the liver, and the liver gets destroyed by antibodies. Now the liver is a key component of digestion. They used to be taught that the liver was just a filter. Think about that. Not too long ago, the liver is just a filter. It's a blood filter. And no, it's not true at all. We know now that it's an organ that is essential for both blood biochemistry and for digestion chemistry, and making a host of chemicals that we need, as well as, yes, it does have some filtering capacity, but it's mostly because of the chemicals that it produces. And I think the bile gland was put there, I guess, for convenience. It's in a good location. I guess it passes, the intestine passes right by there, or you could say it was put there to take care of fat digestion. And something came to my brain, and I just wanted to mention something, and I'm going to forget it. I was running my mouth. That's what I do. So anyway, yes, the liver can get dissolved, and alcohol, whether you're drinking it or the biome is making it, doesn't matter. You can actually, by the way, with the wrong biome, you can get drunk by just eating certain foods. Isn't that amazing? Because you're, if you want to say drunk, a certain level of alcohol in your blood. So you want some of those, but you don't want all of them. And a little bit of alcohol is good. And maybe it should just come from the biome. So I think about these things all day. It's been suggested that a certain amount of alcohol, now really alcohol, we're not talking about red wine that has a host of anti-inflammatories and antioxidants and resveratrol in it. We're talking about just real pure alcohol. There's a little alcohol that's is good for you, but I'm thinking that sounds strange to me. I like to hear that because I want to have some beer here and there, but that sounds strange to me. What if the alcohol that is good for you is the amount that should come from your biome? Mm-hmm. And if you can show an improvement by taking a little alcohol, maybe it doesn't mean that that's an essential ingredient in your diet. What it means is your biome is screwed up and there's not enough alcohol being produced from the biome. So it's just a thought, but I think when you start thinking about diet, it just goes back to diet. Right. Not something that's artificial, and actually alcohol is somewhat artificial. It's produced, by a total another set of processes, but we're making alcohol inside our gut, and you could say, hey, too much, the wrong biome's making too much alcohol, or maybe the wrong biome is not making enough alcohol. Just pretty interesting. So get back to the diet and make sure the inflammation under control. Almost any disease will be better. Any disease condition will improve.
Well, as we know, the benefits of Emulin in helping control and manage carbs and sugars, obviously, I would think it would help to manage some of the alcohol, manage the inflammatory response from that. And the question has come up, what kind of dosage of Emulin, if someone's highly inflamed throughout their whole body, what's your recommendation on Emulin?
Well, I always tried to so-called overdose, and that's really a bad word, but let's say over the recommended dose. The reason we have said 750 milligrams of Emulin is based on two things. One of them is that the original human test on carbohydrate metabolism used 750 milligrams. So we have absolute proof that 750 milligrams works. Mm-hmm. And these people were, an average, there was an average weight, but some people were overweight. Some people, were 200 pounds and some of them were 400 pounds. And so we have kept with that recommendation. And in fact, some countries require us to have 750 because the original patents were based on that amount. But there's two things here. First of all, one dose is not, I like to say right now, as long as the capsules are at 375 each, milligrams each, we need to give one capsule for every 100 grams, 100 pounds a person. And you can use that for cats and dogs and parakeets and children and anybody. One capsule for every 100 pounds. All right, that's a normal condition. That's a maintenance level.
Right.
But where is the true saturation point in the blood? For the average person with average metabolism that's not in a disease condition, probably needs more because the product is consumed. It's not an enzyme or hormone, so it is consumed in the process. So if you are under inflammation and you have tumor necrosis factor alpha all over and you take Emulin, it's going to be eaten up or sponged up. And so that person needs more to keep the blood saturated. Somebody who is so-called healthy, which nobody is, so-called healthy, okay, 750. And in some cases, they could even probably cut back a little bit. But if somebody has something they're trying to overcome, an insult that's there to begin with, you know, take them a whole bottle every day. I don't know where the limit is, but I mean, go to 4 capsules. Now, and maybe even 6. I know Emulin is a little expensive, but let's just talk about physiology right now. Get the condition under control. Make sure you're saturating that system. And then after you are under control, the itis has dropped down, the colitis or whatever you want, dermatitis, inflammation. Then you cut back as you get healthy and keep yourself saturated, and you'll find out what that level is for you based on your own physiology and your own weight and your own genetics. There's one that some people find works and others don't. Maybe one person needs 1 capsule a day, maybe another person needs 3 capsules a day. Having said that, if there's a disease condition, an insult condition, it doesn't have to be an identified disease, take more. And the more, because I just said that you might need it in the reaction itself to clean up the shop. Also, excess Emulin goes to the liver. Remember, I said it was a filter. It goes to the kidneys, to the bladder, because it's eliminated through the urine, the urethra. And we have people right in our own group that's actually what happened to them. They took enough Emulin that it saturated the urinary system, kidneys, bladder, urethra. Yeah. And it cleared them up after their whole life of suffering ulcers in the epithelial lining of these tissues, because it was enough that finally so much stayed in the urine tract. Same thing with the liver. And lastly, it migrates to your skin. And then when you get enough, then you see eczema going away, edema, cirrhosis of the liver, psoriasis of the skin, and psoriasis can be everywhere, but in particular, the one that appears on the skin, the Emulin comes there. And you also will notice, and everybody should try this, if you take enough Emulin, you will not get nearly as sunburned.
Right.
Because it stops the inflammation. And in sunburn, it's another, you got UV rays that come in and do 2 things. They destroy DNA. They cause the chain to get a kink in it. And also the tissues from that radiation start pumping out hydrogen peroxide, and then hydrogen peroxide causes TNF alpha to show up, and then, okay, guess what? And Emulin remarkably does 2 things. It actually works like a shock absorber for that wave to come to the DNA. It's protective. It kind of switches the frequency and causes less DNA damage, but more importantly, even it stops the production of hydrogen peroxide and TNF alpha, and you won't get sunburn. You'll get that initial blush from the heat. You cooked yourself a little bit, but if that initial redness goes away, you won't be sunburned. We were actually going to make a internal sunscreen with this formula at once, but the regulations don't allow for it. Kind of like the silly vitamin regulation. You can't make an internal sunscreen because the test for being a sunscreen does not work with something that's on the inside.
So I have a comment in the question. Type 2 diabetics, been diabetic for 40, 50 years on insulin. Would you say that they may need to have more Emulin at the beginning for an issue like this?
Yeah, so if there is an issue, increase the Emulin and then watch your blood sugar.
Right.
Because you could get hypoglycemic, not from the Emulin, but because you've got insulin in there and you don't need it anymore. So as your body slowly returns to normal, your blood sugar comes down, you're going to need less insulin. So now listen, of course, we cannot tell anyone to take less insulin. That would be illegal and immoral. And they're not here right in front of me either. So, but yes, they should take more because they have a condition that they need to get rid of, and the Emulin is going to be used up in that process.
Yeah.
And then watch their blood sugar and then cut back on their insulin in consultation with their healthcare professional, and they'll see they'll need less Byetta, less metformin, less whatever they were using to lower their blood sugar.
Right.
They'll need less of it. I always want to tell the story that I warned a lady about this. Oh, yes, and she was on an insulin pump. So, you know, constantly getting insulin, and it was on a program. And I said, hey, you're going to get better. So as you take this Emulin, you have to dial that pump down, or you need to go talk to your healthcare professional and work with you on this. She said, oh yeah, I'll do that. So she just that night cut her pump down, back dialed it, and she took Emulin. And so what do you think happened? She didn't cut it back enough and did not go to the doctor. In 48 hours, she was improving so well that she's overdosing on insulin, even though she cut it back.
Right.
And, you know, people are going to say, oh, she cut her pump down and now her blood sugar went through. No, she didn't cut it back enough. And in 2 days, she was hypoglycemic. So, no, don't fool around with these things. You needed to consult with your healthcare professional.
So the last question I have, and I'll open it to the floor. Is there any contraindications for any meds with Emulin?
No, there's not.
Okay.
I say no, there's not at all, but I have to give the caveat on blood thinners. Because it does exist. Quercetin causes your blood to be thinner. And it works very similar to aspirin in this regard. So low levels of salicylic acid, which is what aspirin is, and salicylic acid is found in nature. And again, it's interesting that if we had a real diet, if we could ever identify what a real diet is and that's difficult, it probably includes some salicylic acid. But salicylic acid will cause the platelets to not stick together, to not aggregate. It doesn't cause the less production of platelets, but it keeps them from aggregating, make clumping. And so you're given a low level of aspirin, and it keeps the platelets less in contact with each other, and therefore you end up having less blood clotting if you're prone to it, and you get less, and you might have a heart attack, or aneurysm or something like that, or any blood clot in your brain or whatever. It's given to you because as we get older, our platelets tend to aggregate more.
Mm-hmm.
So you give a little bit of aspirin and it keeps them less aggregate, and they're not liable to clump on their own without, being cut. The reason of aggregating is that's the first line of defense for a cut. Cut, platelets,
Yep.
they stick. Then we have thrombine come in. Thrombine is the bigger piece of material that makes the larger blood, and that's why we call it thrombosis. It's thrombine that is the secondary clotter, and those are all necessary to close that wound, but we don't want that stuff floating around in the capillaries. It'll clog them up. And so you get salicylic acid, you get aspirin, and this is just what's going on with gallic acid. It does the same thing. It keeps your blood from clotting so much. So if you were going to have surgery, or if you were going to be put on a blood thinner, maybe you already had clots, you need to take into account that aspirin will cause this effect, and so they'll say don't take aspirin. If you're going to have surgery, don't take aspirin before the surgery. And if you're going to have surgery, don't take quercetin before surgery, just out of an overwhelming abundance of caution. And we know that quercetin at some level does prevent the ready aggregation of platelets. We say, no, that's the only time. If your doctor has you on a blood thinner, don't take Emulin. And I had much rather them take Emulin and then cut back on the blood thinner, just like you would do with insulin.
Right.
I think that if you had a proper diet, here I'll say this again, if you had a proper diet, you probably wouldn't need a blood thinner. Why do you have those clots? Why do we do this? Why do we have these clots in our body? Okay, take this drug to keep your body from clotting. Well, there's some problem here. It's like having a flat tire and you keep plugging the hole. You got to say at one point, well, why am I getting these flat tires? Hey, there's nails in your driveway, you idiot. Sweep those up and you won't have the flat tire anymore. Well, you know what? The guy who sells you the brooms, he's not the same guy that sells you the tire repair kit. So that's what's going on here. Why you have these blood clots? There's a problem here. Let's look at it. Maybe it's diet. I'll go so far as to say maybe it's because you don't have enough Emulin in your diet.
Questions? Anyone else? Open the floor here.
Well, I've got a comment to make. One of the things that I know, you're talking about my family history, Joe, with the colitis and Crohn's and celiac and non-tropical sprue with my mother and my father. And I was beginning down that path myself. So when I started to learn about this in my practice, I was all ears because it was for my own self-preservation. And I think the thing with wheat, at least that's what my education has been, is that the wheat is really not the problem, or maybe not even the gluten, but now they're taking and with wheat, which really is non-hybrided, they're using Roundup on it to dry it out quicker so they can harvest the wheat quicker. So we got this glyphosate, which causes the leaky gut problem. And then most people that are getting to be a little bit older, we've got a poor diet. So then we got a little indigestion. So then they put us on antacids, which now we're not breaking down the proteins adequately in the body, causing, again, more leaky gut. So it destroys all that biome in such a way. It's just a cascade of poor decisions being made. And then, of course, surgery is the only answer. Well, no, it's not. And, it's really, I think health is really simple. We just got it all screwed up by trying to treat the symptoms with the wrong things and not with our diets. So I just thank you for what you've done. I mean, it's just been a joy to listen to you, to confirm so many of the things that I've been taught. But to go beyond that and to really helping people in such a powerful way with Emulin and with both that and the Climax as well. I thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I spend a lot of time with my wife saying, why am I going to New York again? I just got back from Manila and okay, now I got to go to Las Vegas and and I said, I know why I'm doing it. Yeah, I got a company to run, but I really want to get the word out. And I'd also want to say that while I think that Emulin is a fantastic product, it is one day, maybe probably not in my lifetime, but there will be a time come where we will recognize flavonoid deficiency syndrome. I have to say syndrome because I don't want to say disease. That will be mess us up. Flavonoid deficiency will be recognized one day as along with the diet, this whole concept as a major underlying problem in our society. So, you know, you just said about this glyphosate. Glyco means sugar. It's a sugar, and the body is, okay, that's a poison for sure. And then you have just this running rumble. You can hardly hear, low frequency, inflammation. And so you give this stuff to wheat that's been treated with Roundup, or even some of these
soybeans.
Yeah, you know, genetically modified crops, and that's a whole nother issue. I want to say, hey, maybe they're okay. I don't say anything about them. But what I am saying is what you just mentioned, Rob, and that's Ron, that when you take them in a study and you feed them to mice over and over, and you go through all the processes, and you look at this mouse with and this mouse without, and they both look identical. They both look like they are healthy, and you can't tell that this one has internal inflammation, and that one doesn't. You can't look at you can't tell if it's got IBS, but you check all the boxes, and it looks like there's no harm. How could you tell? Looks like no harm. On the other hand, your family, there's harm. Because you can talk and you can say, man, I feel terrible. It's horrible. And that this and that's happening. Well, the mouse can't tell that. The rat can't tell that. Go into monkeys. They can't tell that. And so it says, okay, approved. And now we're eating products that are all safe because of levels that have been shown to be safe. And friends, they're not safe. They're not safe.
Beverly, you had a question?
Yes. First, thank you, Dr. Ahrens, for your availability and your approachability. I do appreciate it. You were discussing liver and kidney, and I'm seeing a friend this weekend. It's a little off our topic, but it's still on it. Who has cancer, and I have another friend with cancer in kidney, above kidneys. And I'm just wondering if we can make a notable difference with Emulin, or how I can get them on it to help it or slow it down or something confidently. I don't need to tell them all the details like we're talking today. Maybe Dr. Nelson, another day, cancer could be our topic or something. But I just am looking for something general today to want them. Yeah.
Cancer in general.
Mm.
You know, okay, I could go another 2 or 3 hours right now. Are you all ready? Have you had your coffee? Cancer is a really interesting word. And when people say, oh, they got cancer, you know, it's a horrible thing to hear. Cancer is bad because it displaces healthy tissue, and there you get loss of function of the tissue or the organ. That's really the problem with it. It doesn't actually eat up our bodies. You say, oh, he was all eaten up with cancer. He was actually displaced with cancer. And so cancer doesn't convert, you know, doesn't transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. So you get lung cancer and it doesn't work anymore. It's a horrible disease. And then you have benign tumor. Benign, you know what? Good tumor. Or cancerous tumor. It's still, I got a phone call coming. Let me get rid of that. It's still, something's wrong here. It just so happens that in a benign tumor, it just grows alongside the tissue and doesn't displace the tissue, just the wrong side. Having said that, these are all just words. If you were to go to a website like PubMed.com, this is where all the material, all the scientific literature is kept in the world. And most of us in this profession use that site for research. So every scientific article that's ever been written is on PubMed.com. And you can search for any of the products that are in Emulin. And they're on the bottle, so you can read them. Myricetin, chlorogenic acid, gallic acid, and quercetin. And you put myricetin, cancer. Or if you want to be specific, you can say liver cancer. It'll even take layperson words. You don't have to even say cirrhosis. You can just say, or nephrology. You can just use regular English and say myricetin and cancer or whatever. Tumor, anything. And you'll find thousands of scientific papers that say that these individual components reverse cancer. In vitro, which means in a test tube, and in vivo, which means alive. And even some of them don't say the specific ingredients, but they'll say blueberries extract or green coffee bean extract, the same things that are on your bottle, or onions. And it reverses, and then they'll say all this wonderful stuff about all the tumors were gone and the cancer was gone in the rats or the human. And then the last line will say, and further, this shows great promise as a cancer therapy. More research needs to be done, and it will never be done. So it will never become a treatment for cancer because the government will not allow it. I'm sorry. I wish it was not like that. That's the way it is. Why? Because who funds cancer? Now, I'm not saying this is evil, them versus us. This is not. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying this is the system. It will not be funded because who funds work? It is pharmaceutical companies and the NIH, National Institute of Health. Now the NIH is supposed to be a health service that funds health research that maybe a pharmaceutical company wouldn't fund. So if I have gone to them and said, I've got this product and it looks like, look at these thousands of papers that say something's going on here. This stuff is knocking out cancer. It's a therapeutic. Let's go the next step. And so now they've got a proposal in front of their faces, and they got mine here, and they got one right next to it by a drug company that says, okay, we are funding this chemical here, and we want you to put in an additional $100 million. And they say, okay, am I going to fund this one or that one? Well, they know that the drug company will never take that myricetin or that Emulin to market because they can't make any money off of it. But they will take the other one to market, so they throw their money behind the product that they think will be successful in the marketplace. Even though they know that probably this is a better idea, they know that it's never going to happen. So we've got less funding to begin with because the pharmaceutical companies are not going to fund a natural molecule that has been done before, but is like 2 out of 100,000. So they won't fund it. So it's not going to be gone down the drug line, which cost $500 million, by the way, $100 million to $500 million or more, because they can't get their return on their money because we got Emulin. And once the public would find out that that's just myricetin and they could just as easily take Emulin, then the drug company is not going to be able to sell it for $200 a bottle. So it's not going to happen. But I said all that to say there's absolute scientific proof, beyond a doubt, not reasonable doubt, beyond a doubt, that these components will cure cancer, and I can't say that in the public. This is an internal meeting.
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, what's my proof? Go on PubMed yourself, and you may not be able to understand the words because you got to use all these Latin and stuff. But you can use the word cancer, and then just read the last sentence of the abstract. So they're abstracts, so it's the outline of the paper. And read the last sentence, and it'll say, in English, chlorogenic acid has positive effects to get rid of cancer. It'll say something like that, or myristotin, or quercetin. And they take it, and the cancer will be reduced. And there's other things you have to do for that, because, okay, why did you get cancer to begin with? Remember that part. But as far as just getting rid of the big part of the problem, absolutely, and I can't tell anybody this outside of here. You can tell it to your friend. You can say, hey, I look at these doctors, and they're all the doctors, you know, they're from University of California and Berkeley and Texas, and all of them, they're saying, hey, looks like myristotin really works. It's not some oddball university in Asia. It's our own people saying this stuff cures cancer. And then you can tell them, go ahead and try it. What do you got to lose? And the only time you don't want to take Emulin involved with cancer treatment is that if you're on radiation. If you chose radiation therapy, remember I said that Emulin stops sunburn problems. So this is what we're talking about. It will dampen the effect of the radiation, and so the radiation treatment will not be as effective. And so you got to get that Emulin out of your system before you go on radiation therapy, which you use about 4 days. And then you can, as soon as you're out of the radiation, I mean, you're on the damn table, start taking Emulin again while you're in that healing process. That's really, and I said, yes, in that case, if you just had radiation, go take Emulin. And then before the next session, 4 days ahead, don't get on Emulin. So that's my recommendation.
Okay, and chemo, are they okay to take it with chemo now?
Yeah, chemo, no, there's no interaction.
No interaction with chemo. It's fine with chemo. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I'm thinking it also might help us to protect us from some radiation caused by these devices that we all carry around.
Yes.
Yeah, well, what I do is I take Emulin and keep my phone right here. You might see I got a skin graft
Right.
here, and my wife finds me on the couch sometimes like this at 2 o'clock in the morning. I've fallen asleep from talking to Dr. Rajin in Malaysia, and there's no hope for me. Actually, I'm a little hard of hearing. And what'd you say, Ron?
No?
What? And I have these new hearing aids that probably themselves have radiation, but they work right with my iPhone. And I'm actually a bionic man now, and I don't put my phone up to my ear, so I'm sure the radiation coming from the little hearing aid is not nearly as big as the RF coming out of these. Nevertheless, I don't have to fool with that anymore, and I can just keep my phone in my pocket or keep it out on the desk, and it's good within 30 feet. And it actually, the microphones in the ears, actually they're behind through a tube. That's actually where my voice is coming from. And then from the phone, it beams the input right into the hearing aid. So man, I'm telling you, it's great. I don't have to worry about it anymore, but I don't recommend anyone getting deaf just to avoid, to be able to get those hearing aids and avoid radiation from phones. That's the wrong way to go about it. Okay, guys.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Any other questions?
All right, we'll see you sometime in the future. I don't mind talking about cancer, but I know one of the reasons that these sessions are so long is you can't stop me once I go. I'm telling you, I've got so much crap in my head. It just broke my mouth and blah.
Right.
I think one of the our next meeting, I would like to touch a little bit on genetics and kind of branch off from there. And any other topics you all would like to see Dr. Joe address, just let me know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, hour and a half. I'm sorry it went so long, but
It was great.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
It was very good.
Well
Have a
worth
great
the time.
all right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Great weekend.